Good afternoon, Chair members. Tamara Ehrenstein, General Counsel, presenting along with Jasmine Loomis, Research Specialist, on proposed draft changes to 40 Texas Administrative Code, Chapter 607, the Minimum Educational Training or MET Program Rules. Next slide. During our presentation, we'll discuss some background on the MET program, the goals of the rule revision, timeline, stakeholder engagement and input, the rule recommendations themselves, along with a summary of the recommended changes, and the next steps. In the packet, along with these slides, you'll also find a redline version of the proposed rule changes, as well as a side-by-side comparison of the current rules and the proposed changes, which also includes a column summarizing the changes. Next slide. So first, some background on the MET program, just as a quick refresher. The legislature passed a bill requiring the PRB to establish the program in 2013 to provide training to trustees and system administrators. The PRB adopted the initial rules for the MET program in 2014 and launched the program and courses in 2015. The rules were last revised in 2019. The MET rules are intended to ensure that trustees and system administrators have the education they need to successfully perform their duties. The MET statute is crafted quite broadly, so the rules provide more specific information on the actual requirements for training hours and course content, accreditation of sponsors and individual courses, and reporting and record keeping. Next slide. I'll talk next about the goals of the rule revision. Through this process, the agency seeks to increase clarity of the rules and the various MET requirements, improve compliance with the MET requirements, in particular by streamlining the MET cycles and associated reporting requirements. We'll talk more about these various changes in a bit, but currently each trustee or administrator is essentially on their own unique training cycle, which is burdensome for both PRB staff and stakeholders. Relatedly, the rule changes seek to increase efficiency in tracking and reporting MET compliance for stakeholders and PRB staff. And the rule revision also seeks to strengthen PRB oversight of accredited MET activities to ensure that MET offerings by sponsors are high quality. Finally, we have sought to engage stakeholders throughout this process to consider and address their key concerns where appropriate. Next slide. I'll talk next about the timeline for the rule review. In September 2023, I presented on the notice of intent to review rules for chapters 601 through 609 of the PRB rules. At that time, I noted that we expected a need for a longer process on the MET rules, as well as the investment expense reporting rules. In September and October of 2023, we requested informal input from stakeholders on the current MET rules. And I'll talk more about what we learned shortly. The notice of intent was published in the Texas Register in October. That kicked off a 30-day public comment period. We did not receive any formal comments. Today, we're presenting these proposed draft rules to the Education Committee, and following this meeting, we'll distribute the same draft to stakeholders for informal input. In May and June, we'll make any changes needed to reflect feedback from both the committee and stakeholders. And in the July board meeting, we expect to bring the proposed rules for both this chapter and the investment expense reporting rules to the full board for possible action. If the board votes to propose those rules, they would go out for a formal comment period, and we anticipate potential final adoption at the September board meeting. Next slide. I'll talk next about our stakeholder engagement efforts. We've worked closely with stakeholders as we developed these proposed draft rules. As mentioned above, we sent out a call for informal comments on the current rules to our entire stakeholder distribution list in the fall, and we received a handful of responses. We held a stakeholder meeting in December, which was attended by about 20 representatives from a variety of system types. And we also followed up individually with some systems and sponsors to get more information on their feedback. Next slide. So I'll turn now to the stakeholder input that we received. The stakeholders that we heard from held a variety of viewpoints. We discussed the feasibility and considerations for how best to streamline core and continuing education MET cycles. So for example, some systems feel strongly that new trustees and administrators should complete their core training as soon as possible. Some others noted that trustees often balance a long list of requirements upon election or appointment to the board and need some additional time to complete the core training. We also discussed considerations for reporting, record keeping, and changes to forms, particularly those changes that would allow the PRB to timely capture all of the needed information without unnecessarily increasing burden on stakeholders. We also learned more about typical record-keeping practices among systems to consider how changes could affect the systems. Stakeholders also provided input on the unique considerations for in-house training provided by systems for their own trustees and how the current requirements work, or in some cases are challenging for some of these systems. Finally, we discussed the sponsor and course accreditation processes, including how non-accredited sponsors can gain accreditation for a specific MET activity. Some entities we learned have chosen to go that latter route due to the requirements for accreditation as a sponsor. So I'll turn it over to Jasmine now to discuss the rule recommendations.
Good afternoon, committee members. My name is Jasmine Loomis, and I'm PRB's research specialist. And I'm going to be going over our preliminary proposed changes to the MET rules. So starting with subchapter A of this chapter, this includes the MET program's general provisions, including authority, purpose, applicability, and definitions. For section 607.101 regarding authority and section 607.103 regarding purpose, staff have no recommended changes. For section 607.105 regarding applicability, staff have no substantive changes, only suggesting the correction of 2 typographical errors. Next slide. Section 607.104 is a part of subchapter A and includes definitions within the MET rules. Staff proposed changes to a few of those definitions. One change would include replacing the term governing body of the PRS meaning public retirement system, to PRS board to increase clarity and brevity. Another would include replacing the term sponsor regarding an MET accredited sponsor to training provider, as we also use the term sponsor when referring to a sponsoring entity, and it can cause some confusion among stakeholders. Lastly, staff suggests modifying the definition for first year of service. This recommendation stems from staff's proposal to move core cycles to a calendar year. This change is significant as it will benefit systems, trustees, administrators, and PRB staff by streamlining MET cycles. As Tamara mentioned earlier, currently each trustee and administrator has their own MET cycle, which causes confusion and creates more work for systems and staff. The definition would use the current definition of first year of service prior to the beginning of the calendar year 2025 and establish a new definition thereafter. This new definition would move all trustees and system administrators to a calendar year cycle, which we believe will improve compliance by making it easier to track participation and compliance status. Currently, the first year of service is the 12-month period beginning on the first day a trustee or administrator is on the board or their date of hire. The definition would remain in effect through December 31st, 2024. The second part of the definition will be used starting January 1st, 2025, and will state that the first year of service is the current calendar year if the trustee or administrator started before September 1st, and if they begin on or after September 1st, their first year of service is the following calendar year. Staff propose these cutoff dates for the new calendar year core cycles to treat those who join their board toward the end of the year fairly and give them enough additional time to complete their core requirements. We had to create a cutoff at some point during the year and determined this date was the best option to incentivize timely compliance while allowing some flexibility and providing fair treatment to all trustees and administrators. Next slide. Section 607.107 is also part of subchapter A. This section provides an exemption from MET requirements for certain system administrators. This applies for both outside entities and systems who may have a trustee acting in the administrator role. Staff offers making outside entity a standalone definition rather than a definition included within the provision for clarity. Apart from this change, staff has no substantive changes to this section. Next slide. Section 607.110 is a part of subchapter B. It includes the general requirements for the MET program, including the core and continuing education requirements. Currently, for a trustee or administrator's first year of service, they're required to complete 7 hours of core training within 1 year of their appointment or date of hire. For their subsequent years of service, they're required to complete 4 hours of either CE or core courses every 2 years. Staff suggests multiple changes to these rules to make MET compliance easier to understand and follow, which will hopefully increase compliance and make tracking compliance easier for PRB staff. First, staff proposes the earlier mentioned change to a calendar year course cycle to streamline MET cycles and to help trustees, administrators, and systems better understand the timelines for compliance. To accommodate this change, staff recommend authorizing the ability for systems to apply for a 3-month extension for certain trustees and administrators to complete their core requirements. This extension would only be granted in exceptional circumstances, and the request would need to be approved by either the system's board chair, vice chair, or administrator as appropriate. Staff believe this 3-month extension will give trustees or administrators that start near to but before the September 1st cutoff some flexibility, as they could possibly only have a few months to complete their core training, and the end of the year tends to be a busy time for many systems, trustees, and administrators. Second, staff proposes moving CE cycles from a 2-year 4-credit hour requirement to being 1-year cycles requiring 2 credit hours. This change would streamline cycles for CE for all participants, make compliance easier to track, and make record keeping easier for staff and systems. Next slide. Continuing with section 607.110, staff recommends striking a current provision that allows the PRB to give CE credit for courses not covered in the core or continuing education content areas listed in rule. This provision has not been utilized, and all MET courses should fall within the listed content areas, which are very broad. Staff also proposed striking a provision that exempts trustees from completing their CE requirements the year in which their term expires. This provision is no longer needed with 1-year CE cycles. Rule currently specifies that trustees or administrators serving multiple systems can satisfy the MET requirements for all of their systems by completing 1 set of MET requirements. Currently, PRB staff do not have a way of knowing whether a trustee or administrator serves on multiple retirement boards, which can cause confusion with tracking and reporting MET compliance. Staff suggests incorporating a requirement on the PRB 150 form for board changes to notify the PRB that a trustee or administrator is serving on another board. Staff propose allowing trustees and system administrators to earn CE credit for teaching an MET course provided by an accredited sponsor. This will align with standard practices amongst many other continuing education programs. Finally, staff also proposed adding transitional steps to this section regarding the implementation of rule changes. This will include allowing training completed during the final 2 months of this calendar year, when we anticipate the proposed rule changes would go into effect, to apply towards trustee administrators' new cycles that will be beginning January 1st, 2025. This will hopefully provide a smooth transition period for trustees and administrators and time to adapt to the new requirements. Next slide. Continuing through subchapter B, we have section 607.113. Includes requirements for reappointed and re-elected trustees and rehired system administrators. The current rules state that returning trustees or system administrators who've been off the board for less than 2 years do not have to repeat the core requirements. Staff propose extending the period to 5 years, as this will simplify compliance for the returning trustees and system administrators while ensuring they have received sufficient education. This would also hopefully accommodate boards with term lengths longer than 2 years and would match PRB MET record keeping requirements. Next slide. Section 607.120 begins subchapter C and includes standards for MET sponsors. I will use the term sponsor throughout the discussion, but please note that staff recommends changing this term to training provider within the draft rules of your packet. Current rule states that sponsors who provide online training must provide a completion code to participants in order to receive a certificate of completion. As stated, this rule lacks clarity when it comes to other ways they can verify attendees' participation, and doesn't match the current practice of the PRB's own online courses that provide a completion quiz. Staff suggests allowing sponsors to verify participation in other ways, including requiring participants to complete a quiz, using software to verify attendees or conduct attendance checks, or using another method that is approved by the PRB. One final change to the section is requiring rather than encouraging sponsors to review the PRB's curriculum guide. The guide includes important requirements for the content of each accredited course, and sponsors cannot fulfill their role properly without reviewing this information. This change will reflect what is required on an MET accredited sponsor application and will ensure that the sponsor fully understands what is required in their courses. Next slide. Moving on to section 607.122 regarding MET credit hour computation for sponsors. Currently, rules provide a method for computing audio and video credit hours. Staff propose adding simple instructions for computing credit hours for other digital media activities, such as text-based courses or courses using multiple media formats, that states they should reasonably estimate the time needed to complete the course. Staff also suggests adding a reference to an existing rule regarding adjusting credit hours for participants that are late or leave early. Next slide. Section 607.124 specifies the requirements and process for sponsor accreditation. Staff have two proposed changes to this section that will increase efficiency, clarity, and fairness for sponsors. First, staff recommend removing the requirement for the PRB to provide a sponsor number to sponsors, as this is not currently practiced. The PRB follows due to the modest number of accredited sponsors. Second, staff recommends specifying that sponsors whose accreditation is terminated or surrendered in lieu of corrective action are the only sponsors who must wait at least 6 months to reapply for accreditation. Next slide. Section 607.126 covers the ongoing obligations for accredited sponsors, including record-keeping requirements and providing information to the PRB for audits. Staff had two proposed changes. The first would be to add a 5-year record-keeping requirement for course evaluations. This would match other record-keeping requirements for MET accredited sponsors and allow the PRB to request evaluations as part of an audit if needed. Second, staff proposes adding a requirement for MET accredited sponsors providing core courses to directly provide the PRB participation information within 30 days of the end of the MET activity. This addition would help keep track of trustee and system administrators' compliance and allow PRB staff to cross-reference training reported by sponsors and training received on the PRB 2000 for accuracy. PRB staff will also be able to contact those who have yet to report training on a PRB 2000 to ensure they are made compliant. There may currently be some training completed, but simply never reported to the PRB, and we hope this change would help improve compliance. Next slide. Moving to section 607.128, this goes over the accreditation of an MET activity provided by a non-accredited sponsor through the individual course approval application or ICAA process. Staff proposed allowing ICAAs to be submitted after the activity was completed, even if it is not an exceptional case, as the current rules state it must be. The change would match current practice. So long as staff receive all the required information, we are able to approve these applications to help ensure participants can earn credit for these courses. Staff also recommend expanding the time an unchanged course approved through an ICAA may be repeated without needing to submit a new application. Currently, the time is 12 months, but staff are suggesting expanding it to 36 months to increase efficiency for PRB staff, sponsors, and systems. Next slide. Ending subchapter C is section 607.130, which covers requirements for systems that are accredited MET sponsors and provide in-house training to their trustees. PRB staff proposed changes to some of the sponsor obligations system sponsors must meet for in-house training. We heard from systems that some of the general requirements were challenging or unnecessary in the context of a system providing training for its own trustees, often in board or committee meetings such as this one. First, staff recommends exempting system sponsors from requiring that trustees register attendance. Typically, system staff handle this requirement for trustees and can verify attendance using meeting minutes. Next, staff also recommend exempting the requirement to maintain a record of non-trustee or non-administrator attendees. This information can be found in board meeting minutes or other documents already produced by systems, and we are not aware of any example of a non-trustee or administrator seeking to earn credit for attending another system's board meeting. Staff also recommends exempting system sponsors from having to provide certificates of completion to trustees, as we heard feedback from some system sponsors that the certificates were usually not used by trustees and were not needed by administrators to track and report participation. Finally, staff recommends exempting system sponsors from the newly proposed requirement for sponsors to provide the PRB with core course participation information within 30 days of the MET activity. Systems already submit PRB 2000s that include in-house training activities. Next slide.
Jasmine, I feel like I should talk to you. Give you a take a breath.
I'm almost done. We're getting there. Moving into subchapter D, section 607.140, going over reporting requirements for retirement systems. PRB staff have proposed changes to reporting deadlines and some requirements to MET forms. First, staff proposed moving the annual reporting deadline of the PRB 2000 form or MET activity form from its current date of September 1st to April 1st. This change will match the movement to calendar year MET cycles and provide 3 months for systems to compile reports. This timing also works well with the agency's reporting timelines, ensuring the PRB will have all information needed to produce compliance updates and reports. Second, staff propose adding an annual reporting deadline to the PRB 150 form or board change form of April 1st. Currently, PRB 150s are required to be sent upon initial registration and within 30 days of a change to the board. Staff hope that adding the annual reporting deadline will ensure staff have properly updated changes. PRB staff would streamline the reports so systems do not need to again provide information that has not changed from the preceding year. This would also improve compliance tracking as the correct trustees and administrators are being reported annually. Currently, the PRB may not have this information on file for all systems. As mentioned earlier, staff also suggests adding a requirement that systems disclose when a trustee or system administrator is serving on another public retirement system board on the PRB 150. Another recommendation is to add a requirement for the PRB to report non-compliance annually, similar to what is currently included in our biannual reports. Adding this requirement will increase reporting frequency to the board and will increase transparency and awareness of the compliance status of systems, trustees, and administrators. This idea came from board input provided in the March board meeting. Next slide. Finally, section 607.142 contains record-keeping requirements for systems. Staff only had one change to the section, which was to remove the requirement for the PRB to give out sponsor numbers to sponsors. Those mentioned earlier in the presentation as well. Next slide. Some overall changes staff proposed throughout the MET rules include some non-substantive terminology changes, including the earlier mentioned training provider instead of sponsor, and PRS board instead of governing body of the PRS. Staff also proposed changing the term non-core to continuing education, as the term non-core is not commonly used and can cause confusion among stakeholders. Staff also suggests updating URLs to reflect the PRB's new prb.texas.gov address and some typographical errors throughout. I will now hand this back to Tamara, who's going to summarize the changes and our next steps.
All right, I will recap a quick summary of the recommended changes. For subchapter A, which includes general provisions for the MET rules, we proposed a few key definitional changes. which Jasmine just mentioned. Governing body of the PRS would now be PRS board. We would use training provider rather than sponsor, and modify first year of service to fit trustees into calendar year course cycles based on start date. Subchapter B includes the MET requirements themselves. We recommend creating a limited extension process for the modified course cycle. We also recommend changing the continuing education cycle to a 1 year, 2-hour requirement rather than the current 2-year, 4-hour requirement. And we propose authorizing trustees and administrators to gain credit for teaching an MET activity. We also include some proposed transitional language for the changes that would be made. And finally, we recommend extending the time a trustee or administrator may be off board before repeating core training from 2 to 5 years. Next slide. For subchapter C pertaining to MET sponsors, staff recommend adding methods for verifying attendee participation, specifying how course credit is calculated for certain types of digital media, and incorporating the existing requirement to adjust course credit for attendees who are late or leave early. Staff also recommend removing the requirement for the PRB to grant sponsors a number, and we propose adding a record-keeping requirement for course evaluations. We recommend requiring sponsors to provide core training participation information directly to the PRB in addition to the systems. We recommend changes that would align the rule language with current practice for individual course approval applications. Finally, we propose exempting systems providing in-house training from certain sponsor requirements. For subchapter D, pertaining to compliance with the MET program, we recommend changing the deadline for the annual MET activity form to April 1 to reflect the new training cycles. We also recommend making the MET registration form an annual requirement with the same April 1 deadline. We also recommend adding a section to that form notifying the PRB of trustees or administrators who serve multiple systems. Finally, we incorporate the change mentioned previously regarding removing the sponsor number. So I'm going to pause here for any questions or feedback that you have on these recommendations before discussing next steps.
Rob, anything? Chris?
No questions here.
I want to commend the staff for the work on this. I think the changes that have been proposed are really very clear and they streamline things. And I found the revised guidelines, the revised rules to be very easy to work my way through. So I think you did a really fine job of sifting through all of the terminology and the requirements. I thought it was a very good job.
Thank you. All right, next slide. So I will go over next steps. Again, some of these were mentioned during the timeline at the beginning of the presentation. But just to reiterate, we will distribute these draft proposed rules to stakeholders for their input, and then we'll make any modifications to the draft proposed rules that are needed based on feedback from the committee or from stakeholders as appropriate. We plan to present the revised proposed draft rules at the July 25th board meeting for potential action. This would kick off the standard rulemaking process, including a 30-day formal public comment period. We anticipate potential final adoption at the September 25th board meeting. We'll also prepare materials for the implementation of the new rule changes to present and distribute to stakeholders following final adoption of the rules. We're already developing a plan for the various materials that will be needed to ensure that stakeholders are aware of these significant changes. But of course, the final content depends on the rules ultimately adopted by the board. That concludes our presentation. I'm happy to answer any other questions.
Are there any other questions from the committee?
None here.
All right, so I will now call on Mariah Miller to present on item 6. Thank you.
Good afternoon, members. My name is Mariah Miller, and I'm the Policy and Communications Manager for the PRB. Today, we want to provide an update on the PRB's online course utilization. Next slide. From the start of the PRB Minimum Education Training Program, or MET, we've had online courses. However, over time, the trustees and administrators taking the online courses began reporting issues with the previous platform we were using. We were getting pretty consistent feedback about certain types of problems, such as being able to print off certificates or being able to pause the course and come back to it at a later date. In general, the system platform was also just beginning to age, and we were wanting to update it so that we could have a little bit more of a robust program and have some new options for us as we continue to develop new MET courses. During 2022, we created a new website and changed to a new learning management software, also known as LMS. The new LMS had the features we were looking for to help address some complaints from trustees and administrators. It also allows for individual users to create their own logins and have their own unique user dashboard where they can see what courses they are currently enrolled in. From there, they can also navigate to and from those courses, and they can always pause and come back later without losing any progress. The dashboard is also where students can find their previous course certificates for courses taken on that LMS. We are also now able to utilize videos as a different type of content method. And we've started to use that a lot for our non-core CE courses. The new website was officially launched on January 2nd, 2023. So it's been a little over a year now that we've been using that site. Since then, we've also added 4 new CE courses. Next slide, please. So as you know, our fiscal year begins on September 1st. So that launch I just mentioned is already about a quarter into the fiscal year. During fiscal year 2023, we saw more course completions, excluding the year 2017. The fiscal year 2017 statistics are a bit higher than all the other fiscal years because that was the first full fiscal year where the courses were launched online. And during that time period, trustees and administrators were being introduced to the MET program, and they had to complete their core training, which core training does include 7 courses. From that point forward, there was a bit of an ebb and flow every year, likely due to CE cycles occurring over a 2-year period. And many trustees and administrators were using our online core courses to satisfy their CE requirement. So that brings us back to 2023. Following with this trend, we would have expected to see a lot more course completions that year. However, 900 is still a new record for us. We are already well into the 2024 fiscal year, and again, we are following that ebb and flow pattern. So we don't necessarily anticipate having quite as many course completions as we did last year. However, even with the fiscal year not yet quite finished, we've already outpaced several previous years. Next slide, please. A new feature that we have on our website is the addition of non-core courses. We previously only had core courses available, which, as I mentioned, trustees and administrators could retake for CE credit if they wanted to. However, it wasn't necessarily new information, it would have just been a refresher for them. We've been wanting to expand into CE for a while now and offering more of these non-core courses. And the new platform offered us the opportunity to do so. Right now, we currently have a total of 4 non-core courses, which are the Texas Open Meetings and Public Information Act, the Actuarial Standards of Practice 4 updates, Ethical Issues for State and Local Retirement System Officials, as well as the Path to Pension Success. The Texas Open Meetings and Public Information Act course, as well as the Ethical Issues course, was launched alongside the new platform back in January 2023. We then released the AFOP score training in the months following. Board member Christopher Zook hosted a webinar in December of 2023, and that one was the Path to Pension Success course. We then posted that course online on our platform beginning in February 2024. To date, we've had a total of 86 non-core course completions. During the fiscal year 2024 alone, we've had 77. I apologize. I would like to restate that. We've had 86 course completions in the fiscal year 2023, and we've had 77 in fiscal year 2024. We've had a total of 163 course completions to date. Apologies. Next slide, please. Moving forward, we are looking to add more continuing education courses, specifically focusing on timely topics. This is a project that we're currently undergoing the planning stages for, so we are still looking at identifying the exact topics and the exact formats. We are also looking into launching the pension online reporting tool this fall, which is where administrators can upload required reports for the PRB, including their MET-related reports, such as the PRB 150 or the PRB 2000. As plans experience their changeover in administrators, sometimes there is a bit of miscommunication or overlap in what information was or was not previously reported, particularly around various courses that a administrator or trustee had taken. And on the new pension online reporting tool, you'll be able to see a couple of the more recent reports, so this should help a little bit with that. And as a quick note, the LMS and the pension online reporting tool are two separate tools. They don't necessarily talk to each other. So we would still need to receive the PRB 2000s and 150s through the pension online reporting tool, even when it's referencing courses taken on the LMS. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions at this time.
Are there any questions or discussion from the committee?
I have none.
Well, thank you, Mariah. So if there is no further business, the date of the next education committee meeting is yet to be determined. The next pension review board meeting will take place on July 25th at 10 a.m. The location is not yet determined. If there is no further business and no objection, I move to adjourn this meeting. So I need a second.
Second.
This meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.